Amritam vanidhi Dhira dhira jana priyam priyakaram Nirmasaral pujitam Nana shastra vicharanayika nipunam Sadharma sangatham Lokanam hitakaranam Tripumani
Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ajunulambito Bhujo Kanakabhadatu Sankirtanaya Kapitaro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunabhataro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurudai Pushpavanto Chitra Sangdo Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhayo Charano Sako Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subalapriyo Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye.
Shri Gaudiya Vaishnava Guru Parampara Ki Jai, Shri Jīva Gosvāmī Ki Jai, Sat Sandarbhas Ki Jai, Anantakota Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Glorious devotees, thank you so much for coming to this presentation on Śrīla Jīva Gosvāmī's Sat Sandarbhas. We're going to continue today to discuss the epistemology, or the basis upon which Gaudiya Vaishnavism, the basis of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. In our last discussion, we went over the fact that there's something extremely different about spiritual inquiry into revelation and an approach to acquiring knowledge about spirituality. So we're going to continue from there. We've come to the point now where Jīva Gosvāmī has established what is the significance of sabda being a trans-empirical revelation of beyond what we can experience within the material world, with our senses and with our mind, that there is another source of knowledge which will allow us entrance into a fuller and richer understanding of the nature of our own being and the nature of the full potential that we possess as a spiritual particle, as a spirit soul. So in the last class, we concentrated primarily on the nature of that kind of a revelation and the necessity for it being a wholehearted turning of consciousness, wherein we were granted entrance into a realm of understanding And that entrance, Jīva Gosvāmī concluded, that entrance was through the medium of sabda, or transcendental sound vibration. So we'll quickly go through some slides to bring us up to the point of today's discussion, wherein we are going to establish the scriptural basis, or the sabda, the transcendental sound vibration, upon which Gaudiya Vaishnavism is based. And Jīva Gosvāmī is going to present arguments to put forth the premise that for those that are truly seeking such entrance into spiritual revelation, there's nothing better than the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. It is the topmost scriptural basis. And as we explained earlier, when we began this presentation, this is a revolutionary concept. Prior to this idea of the Srimad-Bhagavatam being the topmost Pramana, or scriptural evidence, it's a fact that most theistic Vaishnava traditions in that culture, which was the foremost culture into spiritual inquiry on this planet, the Vedic culture, prior to this establishment of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam as the primary Pramana, other sampradayas had, of course, accepted the Vedic conclusion, but their acceptance was based upon the three highways, as they're known. And those were the Prasthana Trayi, the 10 principal Upanishads, the Vedanta Sutra, and the Bhagavad Gita. And the acharyas of those various traditions put forth elaborate explanations of those texts to support their conclusions regarding spiritual revelation and spiritual thought. Now, going forward, I wanted to mention to you that we will rely heavily on a presentation which is a combination of slides with a little teeny picture of me as the speaker in the corner. The reason for this is if we were to go to a full video of just the speaker, our internet service here does not support bandwidth, which allows just the video without poor quality of the video and actual interference of the audio. So we're going to stick with these PowerPoint or keynote presentations going forward. And hopefully it'll serve two purposes. It'll allow a much more seamless presentation of the material, and it kind of will allow you to enter into the text itself, because I will be relying heavily on presenting and preparing this presentation from Jīva Gosvāmī's Sandarbhas themselves. So we'll continue here. Again, let us always remember at the beginning of these classes that the first 4 of the 6 Sandarbhas are based primarily on 2 verses from the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the Vedanti Tat verse, wherein we find Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti Sabjate, that non-dual absolute could be recognized by various transcendentalists learned transcendentalists, those are inquiring into the nature of their being, that absolute truth is viewed through different, in different ways. And those are primarily Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And the other verse, which is core to the Gaudiya understanding of the nature of the supreme absolute truth, is from the 3rd chapter of the 1st canto, wherein we find Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, which was so prevalently translated and permeated the books of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami when he introduced Krishna consciousness in a very comprehensive Sankirtan movement in the Western world, wherein he introduced again and again this concept of Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. So we left off here with the necessity for epistemological validity in any inquiry into significant knowledge. Jiva Goswami writes in his 9th Sandarbha, this is Anucheta, following the 8 introductory or Mangalacharana verses. The 4 topics were suggested in the verse from the previous Anucheta. Sri Krishna is the subject, Sai of this book. The book's relation, Sambandha, to him is the signifier, Vachaka, to be signified, Vachya. Devotional turning of all the facilities to him, Bhajan, is what is meant to be enacted in all circumstances. That which is to be done, or duty, also known as Abhideya, or unconditional love for him, is the ultimate completion of such devotional turning, Prayojan. Now, in order to investigate these 4 topics, we should first determine a valid means of knowing, Pramana, by which these topics can be ascertained. If we're going to inquire into these items, what is the nature of the supreme absolute truth, and how can we attain him? Or as Sri Chaitanya put it to Ramananda Roy, what is the goal of life and how can it be attained? This Anucheta goes on in this regard. Perception, inference, and other such methods are deficient because human beings are prone to 4 defects. They are subject to delusion, mistakes, they are liable to misrepresent bias, and their senses are limited in functional capacity. Furthermore, these methods of acquiring knowledge are not at all suited to approach the transcendental entity, whose nature is inherently inconceivable and beyond phenomenality. So that being the case, then we must find a valid means of acquiring knowledge which is beyond our sensual realm. So this necessity for coming to a place of spiritual inquiry, which allows revelation beyond what we can commonly experience in the world around us. It must be stated that the basis of sabda is divine perception, known as Vaidusha Pratyaksha, wherein the Vaidusha or transegoic perceiver includes both God and the realized perfected beings. Thus, when sabda is determined as superior to perception, It means superior to avadusha pratyaksha, or sensual perception. And it specifically relates to the field of the trans-empirical. So what's being said here is, yes, there is perception, and we have our perception, and we're very accustomed to it. We have our 5 knowledge-acquiring senses ruled over by the mind. So we can hear, we can smell, we can see, we can taste, we can touch, and the mind is the regulating factor. And that gives us pratyaksha, or a methodology for perceiving. But there is a transegoic perceiving that is available beyond the sensual plane. And that is transcendental. It begins with transcendental sound vibration, or divine perception. And that's referred to as sabda. I'm confused as to how this works. Okay, excuse me for that. So now we'll go on to the 10th Anucheta. And from here, we're gonna take, as I said, the Tattva Sandarbha is the basis for all of the Sandarbhas. So we need to ground ourselves in an understanding of how Jīva Gosvāmī is presenting his knowledge. So the Tattva Sandarbha can basically be divided into 3 major sections: the invocation, or the Mangalacharana, epistemology, or Pramana, how is the knowledge basis arrived at, upon which all the information or revelation, in the case of the Sandarbhas, is going to be based. So we call that epistemology. And then also in the Tattva Sandarbha, we end with a little ontology. What is it that we are to know, and how did the original knowers of the Pramana that is put forth, how did they come to this conclusion? So we're now at a point where Jīva Gosvāmī is going to establish the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam as the primary Pramana for sabda, the primary source of trans-empiric revelation or sound vibration. And he's going to make some pretty profound arguments to put forth the fact that Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is the primary Pramana when it comes, and the primary scripture. It actually is the sun around which all other scriptural presentations revolve. And as I said, this is a very, very Gaudiya idea. You may not find other Vaishnav traditions, even though they accept the Vedas, utilizing this kind of a conclusion, and utilizing the Bhagavat Purana as the primary Pramana of their schools of thought when it comes to spirituality. But for us, our spirituality is based upon these conclusions. So now Jīva Gosvāmī is going to say, well, why have I selected? Why should you select as somebody seeking spiritual revelation, as somebody seeking to enter into a deep understanding of yourself, why should you take shelter of this this conclusion of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam being topmost? So he states in the 10th Anucheta, consequently for us who are inquisitive about that entity who is beyond everything, yet is ground and support of everything, who is fully inconceivable and wondrous in nature, perception, inference, and so on are not suitable means of valid knowing. For this purpose, the only means of valid knowing is the Veda, the transphenomenal aprakrita, words that eternally self-exist without beginning. They are the source of all phenomenal and transcendental knowledge that have been passed down intact through all authentic lines of succession, parampara. So he's beginning here. The only means of valid knowing is the Vedas. What he's saying is we can't rely on our senses because they're defective. And he's already pointed out those defects in the prior Anucheta. So therefore, we have to go to transcendental sabda, sound vibration, which is a purushaya. It's beyond human, not beyond the human intellect, but it's not coming from the human intellect, and a human intellect specifically based upon material sense apprehension, perception, and material intellect based on conclusions or inference based upon those perceptions. So through this section on epistemology, I have kind of pulled out specific anuchetas, and in those anuchetas, just specific paragraphs or clauses which kind of bring out the essence of all that's presented there. The section on epistemology in the Tattva Sandarbha is extremely extensive. And since these classes are going to the Krishna Sandarbha for detailed analysis, we're just doing an overview here to establish the principles upon which all the Sandarbhas are based, so that at least going into the study of the Krishna Sandarbha, we know the overall basis and the methodology and the groundwork upon which Jiva Goswāmī is presenting this knowledge. Then he goes on. He goes on to say, because at present it is difficult to study the Vedas in their entirety, and because their meaning is highly abstruse, and further yet, because even the great thinkers who have commented on the meaning of the Vedas interpret them in contradictory ways, we should study only the Itihasas and Puranas, since they are Vedic in nature and are conclusive in determining the meaning of the Vedas. Moreover, with the help of the Itihasas and Puranas, we can infer the meaning of the unavailable portions of the Vedas. Thus, at present, only the Itihasas and Puranas are the appropriate sources of valid knowledge. Again, revolutionary point. And you will find even in contemporary Gaudiya thought, many people will say, well, you have to go back to the original Vedas, not Gaudiya thought, but Vaishnava thought, if you really want to understand the meaning. And Jiva is saying, no, we accept the Vedas, but if you really want to get to the heart of the matter and have something that you can relate to and you can draw spiritual inspiration from and even foster your own spiritual revelation from, then we need to go beyond the original four Vedas and go to the fifth Veda, which is the Mahabharata, the Itihasas, and the Puranas. Then on in the 12th Anucheta, he's going to begin to justify this conclusion. And I wanted to share with you something which is quite interesting in this regard. This is from the commentary on the 12th Anucheta by Satyanarayan Das Babaji. Formerly, the Rig Veda was divided into 21 branches, the Yajur Veda into 100 branches, the Sama Veda into 1,000 branches, and the Atharva Veda into 9 branches. So as we all know, Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas, he wrote down the Vedas. And so it was everything was passed down orally prior to this, him putting everything in writing through a scribe. And when he put everything in writing, he came up with these 1,130 branches of the various Vedas. And then it goes on to say, each of these branches has 4 subdivisions called Samhita, Pramana, Aranyaka, and Upanishad. So altogether, the Vedas consist of 1,130 Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads, a total of 4,520 titles. Then we come to the interesting point. At present, only about 11 Samhitas, 18 Brahmanas, 7 Aranyakas, and 220 Upanishads are available. This constitutes less than 6% of the original Vedas. So in the short span of 5,000 years, from all those 4,520 titles which comprise the original Veda, which were written down by Srila Vyasadeva, we currently can only find in existence 6% of that original total. Just a little graphic to show you that. So if that little piece of the pie would be how much we have available of the total original 4 Vedas at present. If somebody ever comes and says, well, I only want to study the original Vedas, you can say, well, that's fine, but you do realize that you have available to you only 6% of those original Vedas for study at present. Then Jiva Goswami goes on in Anucheta 12, in the commentary there also, some more interesting points. There are 2 varieties of Sanskrit. As we know, all the scripture is coming in Sanskrit. Vaidika, Vedic, and Laukika, current in the world or ordinary. And only the first of these is found in the Vedas. A scholar of ordinary Sanskrit must learn extra vocabulary and rules of grammar, which require years of study in order to understand Vedic Sanskrit. So when we talk of Vedic Sanskrit, well, first of all, there was a societal rules in place that only the Brahminical class were allowed to study the Veda, because they were believed to be, of course, the only personalities who have the qualification to do so. All others were barred from it. And we notice it in the the Vedic Sanskrit, the rules are such in the way that the Sanskrit is presented and composed, all the rules that must be applied make it extremely difficult, if not completely impossible, to alter the original presentation in any way. Whereas Sanskrit that is used in the Mahabharata, the Itihasas, the Puranas, that Sanskrit, Laukika, does not follow such strict regulation. Now, this will become very, very much prevalent as one enters into the various commentaries on the Bhagavat Purana. If you become a deep reader of the various commentaries of Bhagavat Purana, you'll notice in various places the commentators, whether they be Vishwanath or Sanatana Goswami, Jiva Goswami, and his Krama Sandarbha, or Vaishnav, Toshini commentary. The various commentaries says they sometimes point out to us in their commentary, this is sometimes written in this way, or this word is used instead of that word. So we can learn from that over time, various presentations of the Puranas are changed. And as you know, prior to the printing press, the scholars and the inquirers, if they wanted a scripture for their library, they had to copy it. So we can understand how these kind of changes would have been made, where someone would have read, a sadhu would have read something and said, well, that the more appropriate word would have been this. And what we note in the commentaries when we study them is generally, although a specific Sanskrit word may have been changed, the commentary always generally points out that this does not change the overall meaning of what's being presented here. Either that word or the other word, or even sometimes Vishwanath will say, this should be that, but he doesn't change the original word from the text itself. So again, what's happening here is we're coming to an understanding of why, according to Jiva Goswami, why the Itihasas and Puranas they're easier to understand. They're written in a Sanskrit that is easier to comprehend, and they're in a form that's available to everyone. You don't need a Brahmana studying years and years the Sanskrit language just to enter into a study of these scriptural texts. He goes on in the 12th Anucheta. The Puranas are so called because they complete Purana. It is not possible to expand the meaning of the Vedas by means of a non-Vedic source, just as one would certainly not employ lead to finish an incomplete gold bracelet. There may be an argument, well, the Puranas really aren't Vedic in nature. They're just a supplement. They really don't carry the same spiritual significance and spiritual potency as the original Vedas. And Jiva's saying, no, Purana means something that simply completes. It completes the presentation. And you can't say that you would complete a presentation on the Vedas, the ideas presented there, with something that was non-Vedic, just as you wouldn't complete the manufacture of a gold bracelet with any other substance. This is his argument. He goes on to say the itihasas and Puranas are non-different from the Vedas in as much as both categories of literature are without human origin, a Purushaya, and delineate the same specific truth. So he's continuing his arguments in support of the significance and the acceptance of the itihasas and Puranas as viable spiritual revelation or sabda Brahman. Additionally, he goes on to quote from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad as evidence, my dear Maitreya, the Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva Vedas, as well as the itihasas and Puranas, all appear from the breathing of the Supreme Being. So the source is the same. He presents more evidence. And now, as evidence, he is starting to present the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Brahma manifested the four Vedas, Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva, from his four mouths, facing the east, south, west, and north, respectively. Then the all-seeing Lord Brahma brought forth the fifth Veda, the Puranas and the itihasas, from all his mouths. Another quote from the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the Puranas are the fifth Veda, the itihasas and Puranas are called the fifth Veda. So the source is the same. And the Vishnu Purana affirms that the Puranas and itihasas establish the meaning of the Vedas. On the pretext of writing Mahabharata, Shrita Vyasa has explained the meaning of the Vedas. Without doubt, all the Vedas are firmly established in the Puranas. The distinctive illumination of Vyasa, revealer of the itihasas and Puranas. Here the word Veda also includes the itihasas and Puranas. Thus, it is established that only the study of the itihasas and Puranas is supremely beneficial. And of these two, the Puranas are more excellent. Lord Shiva confirms this in the Naradiya Purana. O lovely one, I consider the Puranas more important than the Vedas because the Puranas firmly establish all the Vedic meanings. There is no doubt of this. Jiva Goswami continues, making his case. You can see he's gradually, step by step, building his argument for the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. So somebody may argue, Śrīla Jīva Gosvāmī responds to objections regarding Puranas being specifically presented according to the influence of the modes of material nature, some even suggesting Vedanta Sutra is more reliable. So of course one can make an argument. If we look at the Puranas as a general library of spiritual insight, that spiritual insight is written differently according to the audience. And the audience, of course, is to greater or lesser degrees under the influence of the modes of material nature. So there are Puranas in the modes of goodness, Puranas in the modes of passion, and Puranas in the mode of ignorance, or presented for the readers in those modes. The Puranas themselves, of course, are transcendental, but they're presented in order to uplift people who are to greater or lesser degrees under the influence of the Lord's external material potency. So one may object, well, you can't really rely on them for the topmost spiritual presentation because they're geared to different modes, people in different modes. So how can we arrive at a conclusion? So Jiva Goswāmī answers such an argument. Of course, their argument is, so we should rely on the Vedanta Sutra, which is Śrīla Vyasadev's compilation of the primary spiritual ideas put forth in the Vedas. So it's like a book of sutras of these topmost spiritual thoughts. To that, Jiva Goswāmī responds in his 18th Anucheta, this problem could be solved if there was one scripture that had the characteristics of a Purana, that was without human origin, that presented the essence of all Vedas, Itihasas, and Puranas, that was based on Vedanta Sutra, and that was available on earth in its complete form. Wow, if we could find that, then we've solved the problem. Oh, to this, Jiva Goswāmī responds, my dear sir, what you have said is an accurate statement of truth, and the specific criteria mentioned by you particularly brings to mind our revered Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the emperor of all Pramanas, because it fulfills the said criteria. You said, if you could give me this, of course, Jiva Goswāmī himself has presented the problem in his Anucheta, and now he responds to the problem he has created himself or presented himself. We notice that this is a recurring theme as we go on in his study of the Sandarbhas. He presents arguments that in order to bring out transcendental truths that are just, the arguments themselves are phenomenal. Who would present such an argument? And only someone who would have the depth of understanding like Śrīla Jīva Gosvāmī. So now we go on to the characteristics of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam that establish its epistemological validity. This is an introduction to a series of Anuchetas from 19 to 26, where Jiva Goswāmī establishes in a very, very substantial way, beyond any questioning, why Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is that topmost pramana for those interested in a spiritual turning of consciousness. The Anuchetas in this division, this is the division we're now coming into, delineate a few of the primary characteristics of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam that further specify its epistemological validity. But again, this is not merely to convince us of the Bhagavat's authority as a discursive reference text about reality. The intent, rather, is to actualize the possibility of the direct knowing of that reality. So the primary characteristics enumerated, such as Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is the natural commentary on Vedanta Sutra and the essence of Gayatri, function more as sutras or keys that turn or unlock consciousness to disclose their own meaning, identical with the reality they signify. Again, we're entering into a into a journey, a spiritual journey, which is meant to bring us to spiritual realization. Again, this is not an academic exercise. Don't look to these arguments that are being made in support of the Bhagavatam as simply some support for its authority as a spiritual text. What we find in those that gave us the Bhagavatam, recited the Bhagavatam, and those that enter into the mysteries of the Bhagavatam is that they have utilized this text to unlock a doorway into spiritual revelation, which you yourself, as a sincere inquirer, can experience through participating in the discourse of the Bhagavatam. It is a spiritual text. It carries that much spiritual potency. It is sabda. It is trans-empirical, and it is descending from the transcendental realm and contains the Lord's internal potency itself within its pages or within its discourse amongst the sadhus. It is truly a manifestation of the Lord's Swarup Shakti. Jiva Goswāmī goes on. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is a natural commentary on Vedanta Sutra and the essence of Gayatri. Okay, and let's look at Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam as being head and shoulders above all the other Puranic presentations, and there's some reason for that. So it doesn't fall within the purview of those Puranas which are directed to various segments of human society based on their preconditions, the impressions that the signs that they're born on, under the modes of goodness, the modes of passion, the modes of ignorance, conglomerating into stars, and we're born with all of that karmic baggage. The Bhagavatam's presentation is for everyone, and it sets aside that. It's not just for someone in goodness or passion or ignorance. Indeed, Lord Vyasa was not satisfied even after compiling all the Puranas and the Vedanta Sutra. He therefore brought forth Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, which was revealed to him in trance as the natural commentary on his own sutras. In Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, we find the consistent reconciliation of all scriptures, as understood from the fact that the Bhagavatam's truth revelation unfolds directly from the Gayatri mantra, the embodiment of the essential meaning of all the Vedas. As expressed in the Bhagavatam by the words Dharma projita kaivato tra parama, the Bhagavatam propounds the ways of ultimate truth, devoid of all forms of deceit and compromise. And as will become clear in the upcoming Anuchetas, this Dharma is indeed characterized by meditation on the Supreme Personal Absolute Bhagavan. We'll jump ahead a little. Therefore, concluding that Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is the preeminent scripture and the only one that is imperative for us to study, Skanda Purana states, what need is there for accumulating hundreds and thousands of other scriptures? Revolutionary thought here. Only this one book. If you're to have only one book in your library and to study only one book throughout your life, make it Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. It will fulfill everything. It's luminous like the sun, as we know. It came after Lord Krishna departed. Thus, while there are many authoritative scriptures It is specifically Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam that has been singled out with the statement, for those in Kali Yuga whose vision is impaired, this Purana has now arisen like the sun. This comparison of the Bhagavatam to the sun indicates that without its light, other scriptures cannot fully illuminate the absolute truth. Again, it is hard to underestimate the revolutionary nature of what Śrīla Jīva Gosvāmī is propounding here in his Sandarbhas. He's saying we can set aside all other scriptural presentations. We can set aside the Vedas, if we could find enough of them to study. We can read other scriptures, but utilizing the light of the Bhagavat Purana to properly illuminate their meanings. So very, very revolutionary approach. Again, I've only brought out highlights here, and I'll continue to share those highlights with you. If you want to dive deeply into the Tattva Sandarbha, I did give quite a few classes on it in detail, Anucheda by Anucheda, or section by section, which is how Jiva Goswami presents this knowledge. So he quotes in the 24th Anucheda, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is the cream of the Vedas, and he uses the Bhagavad Purana itself as his Pramana. After extracting the cream of all the Vedas and Itihasas, Sri Vyasadeva imparted the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam to his son, Sukadeva, the best of those established in direct realization of the self. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is indeed the essence of all Vedanta philosophy. He who is satiated by the nectar of its unprecedented taste, rasa, experiences no interest in any other literature. I take refuge of Sri Sukadeva, the teacher of all sages, the son of Vyasadeva, who out of compassion for those entangled in the cycle of birth and death, and who aspire to cross over the dense darkness of material existence, spoke this most confidential Purana, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, which is self-endowed with supramundane power, because the essence of all the Vedas, one without being the essence of all the Vedas, one without compare, and the light of supreme transcendence. Jiva writes further, consequently, while some scholars conclude that other Puranas are dependent upon the Vedas to derive their authority, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam explicitly refutes the possibility that it may be dependent in this way. Rather, the Bhagavatam stands on its own authority. For this reason, it is, in fact, the highest manifestation of Shruti, the original Vedas. Thoughts like these had not been introduced prior to Jiva Goswami. This is all based upon Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's love for the Bhagavat Purana. He was very much this idea of the Bhagavat Purana being the topmost manifestation of spiritual understanding, of course, originated with its author, Srila Vyasadeva, who, after presenting everything else, was dissatisfied. We will speak more on this when we come to the next section regarding that revelation. So I won't go there quite yet. Now we come to two particular Anuchedas wherein Jiva Goswami presents the way in which the Sandarbhas were compiled by him into the various Anuchetas, and upon whom his explanations primarily depend. Again, giving validity to his Sandarbhas in a very profound way for the audience of the day, so to speak. So regarding this methodology, overview, this brief section consisting of just 2 short Anuchetas is imperative for understanding Śrīla Jīva Gosvāmī's strategy for analyzing Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, which he has already established as his Pramana in the manner of the self-disclosure of ultimate reality. It informs us of the manner by which the author has arrived at his conclusions throughout the Sandarbhas. So the first of these, the theoretical formulations to be derived from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. So now we're going into, we're going to begin to go into the text of the Sandarbhas. So in the Sandarbhas, we are going to be presented with the essence, which is what the word Sandarbha means, of what's contained in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. And that's going to be presented very methodically and in a way that brings out Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan systematically. So the first 4 Sandarbhas dealing with Sambandha, the Tattva first, we're doing an overview now of Tattva Sandarbha. Then we have the Bhagavat Sandarbha, the Paramatma Sandarbha, and the Krishna Sandarbha. These 4 Sandarbhas give us a grounding in Sambandha Gyan, or an understanding of the nature of the supreme absolute truth, and in understanding ourself, which will come out profoundly in the Paramatma Sandarbha. And then he goes on in his 5th Sandarbha to present us the bhakti, the abhideya, the practice. How are we to engage ourselves in a way that this self-actualization of spiritual revelation can be acquired? There is a way, there's a methodology, and that is the practice of bhakti. So how should it be done? What is the primary focus that he has drawn from the Bhagavat Purana itself? All of these conclusions he's drawn from the Bhagavat Purana, and he's drawn them from the Bhagavat Purana in this way. And this is the methodology. And then, of course, the Prayojan, the Priti Sandarbha. How do you love? How is that love experienced? And how does the Bhagavat Purana gain us entrance into that experience of the love, the rasa for the Supreme? So I will go into this because I want to explain it a little more deeply at the beginning of our next class. These 2 Anuchetas as to the nature of how Jiva Goswami is going to present his evidences in support of his conclusions, which provide us with these with a comprehensive understanding of these 3 items, Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan, according to the Bhagavat Purana, or the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, which he's just now established as the primary Pramana, or the sun around which all scriptural evidence rotates. So we'll stop there for now. And you have any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question. You mentioned the Atharva Vedas, and I was reading in the Bhagavatam this morning, in the 12th canto, they're talking about the different Vedas. And one of the things they said, or I think it was Vishwanath said in his commentary, and I couldn't find it, I didn't bookmark it, but that Brahma gave the Vedas to Atharva, his first son, and I never heard that before. Have you ever heard that? I mean, I know it's one of the Vedas, but it didn't make sense. Maybe it was a misprint. Oh, sorry. It was that. Oh, could you hear me? Okay, I forgot.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm not familiar with that enough to make any comment on it. Of course, we know that the various Vedas are entrusted to various sages. So the fact that Brahma would entrust a specific portion, or did you say the entire Veda or a portion of the Veda?
He did give the Vedas to, yeah, it says I think it said the entire Veda. I'm going to try to read it tomorrow and see if I can find it again. But the thing that stumped me was his first son, Atharva. And I was like, you know, that's
of course. I mean, it would just be like a caretaker. Here, take care of this, this knowledge for me on my behalf. And that son, of course, probably was in the mode of goodness primarily. Jiva's primary. I mean, Brahmaji is primarily involved in management of worldly affairs. So for him to entrust that knowledge to one of his offspring, it's certainly understandable.
Okay. I thought that he was saying the name of his son was Atharva. I guess that's what I thought.
It could have been, yes.
Oh.
That's also possible.
Okay.
The Vedas had not yet been specifically named. And I'm not familiar enough with the Veda properly. Yeah, I believe, if memory serves me, that the Atharva Veda was all the Vedas originally, and then they came out from that.
Okay.
But don't quote me on that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, I'll take your leave. Thank you very much for your association. Bunch Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tanapano Premamritam Manidhi Dhira Dhira Jana Priyau Priyakarau Nirmasaram Pujitau